Hello, this is Kelly Hamon, and welcome to the Resiliency Coach podcast. This podcast showcases people who have faced difficult times and how they got through it. These experiences are real and sometimes raw. Please be advised that these podcasts could trigger unresolved emotions. Please also be aware that the people who share their stories are here to tell you you're not alone in your struggle. They share the tools and resources they use in healing. If you're looking for solutions for getting through tough times, contact us at www.resiliency.coach. This is not medical advice. All opinions expressed by the interviewee are their own personal opinions and not necessarily those of the Resiliency Coach. So today I'm interviewing my friend, Dr. Louise Williams. Louise is the only philosophical counselor in the world fully dedicated to helping the survivors of toxic people feel understood. Her work is dedicated to unlocking the tools of philosophy to help survivors navigate the fallout of long-term abuse. So Louise, thank you for being my guest today and sharing your story with us.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
And would you please share with us your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up with two toxic parents. So both of my parents were abusive in very different ways. And I recognized that my mother was a challenging mother when I was quite young. But it wasn't actually until I was almost 30 that I realized my father also had some of these challenges. We can say gently challenges. So I went, through elementary school and middle school, really trying to you might say like trying to fix my mother. That might be one way to try to say it. And it never worked. It was not the right thing. She had a lot of mental health issues that were not the kind of thing that, I could do anything under my control to really impact. So by the time I was in high school, I pretty much understood this about my mother. And I was kind of coming to terms with the fact that we were not really going to have a traditional relationship. And so when I graduated from high school, my mother decided she wanted to divorce my father. And my father and I probably had what would be described as a codependent relationship. We were very, very dependent on each other. We had a lot of, I didn't feel okay unless he felt okay, those kinds of issues. So when my mother decided to divorce him, I went into caregiving mode. And I found us a different place to live. I moved us out of that house using my friends from high school, right? So we're like all 18 and doing this for my father, who is a lot more than 18. And we ended up moving into a house that my friend from high school, her father, owned this house. And so we got there. I got my father established there, and then I went to college in a different place. And while I was away at college, my father ended up in a romantic relationship that didn't last very long. The codependency changed between me and my father, but it was still not a very healthy environment. And he ended up getting really sick. And through his sickness, I was trying to finish my undergraduate degree. So I have a BA in philosophy. I was working on that. I got involved with a toxic man who I ended up marrying. No longer married to him, thank goodness. And then when he got sick, I actually ended up bringing in that toxic husband to help take care of him because he had a lot of physical needs that I couldn't do on my own. So what happened was, as I went to graduate school across the country from where I grew up. And my father was still very ill, still had a lot of chronic problems. So I decided I had to bring my toxic husband. We were separated technically at the time, but still legally married. So I ended up in a house during graduate school with my toxic father and my toxic husband at the time, trying to get through all that, which was chaos, absolute chaos. Don't recommend. One thing that doesn't make a difficult situation better is doubling the number of difficult people. Never going to help. So we we managed about maybe 6 or 9 months before I was like, there is no way I'm ever going to finish my PhD if I continue. Like, there's no way. I'm emotionally tapped. I'm mentally tapped. I failed a class. I failed a class called Logic, which is a mathy kind of class in philosophy. I'm not naturally good at, but it was mostly from the chaos of living with these people. So got rid of the ex-husband, finalized the divorce, moved on from that. Still had the toxic father for a while because I was now financially wrapped up with him because he was fully financially dependent on me. He had no resources and I had a small stipend from my university. So I was needing a distraction and I was like, I'm going to date somebody who's not toxic now. We're going to try something new. And so I turned to the internet and I ended up finding a really high quality person to be my partner, who I am still with today. And through that really positive relationship that I have with my partner, I was able to start to unpack that actually my father was engaging in a lot of abuse throughout my life and really starting to see that and come to understand that. So within a couple years of being with my partner, we've actually reached a point where I am fully no contact with my toxic father, and I am free from that chaos today. So throughout that whole process, I learned a lot about what it's like to be abused, what the challenges are, dealing with abusive parents in particular, like the weird ways that we end up replicating abusive environments through the choices in our partners and these sorts of things. And so when I graduated with my PhD, I knew I wanted to give back to other people who were facing similar challenges. So that's when I went into philosophical counseling. And today I help the survivors of toxic people, learn to live a life that's fully for them and not just echoing the abuse of their past.
So what tools did you use to be able to free yourself of your father who was toxic? And when you say toxic, do you always mean abusive, or is there other terms for toxic?
Yeah, so this is a really important question. So I think in general, when I say toxic person, I'm typically referring to somebody who has a personality disorder. So that's usually a narcissistic personality disorder, maybe borderline personality disorder. I don't believe that all people who have personality disorders are necessarily abusive, but I think very often because of the challenges they face, they end up hurting people whether they intend to or not. So not all toxic people are abusive, but I tend to work with people who identify as abuse survivors. That's the main sort of thing. So, some of the tools that I think really helped me over time, a lot of it came from philosophy, actually, what I was studying. So when I was in high school, I actually found a book by Marcus Aurelius, who was like a Roman emperor, and he was a Stoic philosopher. So Stoicism is a little bit popular today in like mainstream media, but it wasn't when I was in high school. And I read his book called The Meditations, which are just like really short one-liners about, different ways of thinking about the world. And his, Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius is really about learning not to kind of be controlled by our feelings, but instead recognizing that like we make a choice when a feeling comes up, we can make a choice about how to react to that feeling. And I found that at the time really empowering because there was so much in my life that I could not control. And it seemed like, okay, well, I don't know what my mother's going to do, and I don't know what my father's going to do. And, I was having some like kind of more trivial like drama with my friends in high school, right? And I was really like, okay, what can I control? What can I do to try to get through all of this so I don't have to have these huge feelings all the time? And that idea of separating the emotions from who I am turned out to be really powerful. And it eventually led to my discovery of Buddhist philosophy. So that's one of the main things I studied as a philosopher is Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism. And I thought that a lot of the things I liked about Marcus Aurelius, a lot of the stuff that was cool, I thought that like the Buddhists were doing a little bit better. One of the reasons for that is Buddhism has this emphasis on compassion, right? And especially like self-compassion, right? Where we're really trying to do things in a non-judgmental way, hold a lot of space for each other, and really not label situations as a good thing or a bad thing. And that was like revolutionary to me at the time, because I didn't live in a world that had a lot of space for compassion, right? There was just a lot of like trying to survive and get through things. And I think the Buddhism element really helped me see like I can still be a nice person. I can still be kind and sweet and generous. And I don't have to sacrifice that because I am in an abusive situation. I can have both. And today, Buddhism is one of the main things I pull on when I help survivors.
So what I'm hearing are the tools that you used were the books you found through studying as well as independently, as well as Buddhism, your religion that you practice. And so when you say detach yourself from the emotion, can you explain that? Can you tell the audience what that means? Does it mean letting go of the emotion? Does it mean harboring the emotion? Does it mean ignoring the emotion?
Yeah, good. So this is actually one of the big differences between Stoic philosophy and Buddhist philosophy. So in Stoicism, they're going to promote an idea of detaching from the feeling. So that's DE, right? That means you kind of like push the feeling away, say, that's not me. It's over there. I'm totally the separate thing. I'm going to ignore that. So Stoics like that because they think you're kind of exerting power over the emotions. Buddhists don't like the idea of detachment. Instead, they like the idea of non-attachment, right? So we can think of non-attachment as the middle between detachment on one side and attachment on the other. So with non-attachment, you aren't taking the feeling like shoving it in the corner. Now you're saying, oh, look, a feeling. There it is. Look at what it's doing. Oh, and there it goes. Right? So you don't like hold on to it. You don't push it away either. You let the feeling be what it is. You try not to label it as good or bad. You let it sit. You acknowledge its presence. Maybe you spend time with it if that's what it needs. And then you watch it go on its way.
Interesting. That's great. And how did you get the courage or the knowledge, because it could have taken both, to be able to leave your father finally, to be able to be free of him? What was it? Was there a tipping point, one? And when was it that you decided that, and how did you get out?
Yeah, so for me, there was a very clear tipping point. And that was when he needed to go to the doctors very often. He had like a medical thing that required he go to the doctors 3 times a week to get some support. And we have a service in my city called Access, which means like if the bus goes by your house and you can't physically use the bus, a car will come and pick you up and take you to where you want to go. And my father, because of maybe his pride or like whatever thing it was, chose not to utilize that service and instead requested that I take him to these doctor's visits 3 times a week while I was trying to finish my degree. And I tried it for a little while, and it was a horrible experience. I was completely destroyed at the end of each one of these days, to the point where I would have to take time off the next day. So for a little while, I only had like 3 hours in the day while he was actually at the appointment where I could get work done. And then the next day I'd have to take off, and then I'd do it again. And I was just cycling. That was really pushing me to my limits. And, you know, I got to the point where I was engaged in something called reactive abuse. So this is when somebody is abusing us in a way where it's really pushing us and it's really pushing us. And then we act in a way that might be abusive because we've been pushed so far. So I saw in myself that I was shifting into that space where I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't making choices about what I wanted to do. Instead, I was just like screaming at the top of my lungs. And I saw that and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be that person. I'm not going to live the rest of my life having screaming fits with my father. That's not good for him. That's not good for me. This is a big distraction from the goals I have. So that day was like one day in the car it happened. I was just, because I was so exhausted. I just lost my mind. And after that day, I was like, okay, we're going to either try to never talk to him in that way again, or we're going to leave. And the very next day, he ended up screaming in my face because I had the audacity to agree with a pharmacist. Like the pharmacist was like, your medication, you need to talk to your insurance. It's like an insurance problem. He disagreed with that. And I was like, probably like the pharmacist is right. And he got super in my face. And I didn't get back at him, right? I'd already decided I wasn't going to do that. So I left. I slammed the door and I left. And I basically never went back. You know, I think the deep point here is that decision point that I had, right? Where like I saw that I was headed down a path that I didn't want, I didn't like about myself. I had been in similar spaces in the past with my toxic ex. He had pushed me to some of these places. And I knew how nasty and ugly and painful those places are. So I decided, no, that's not my life. I'm going to live my life for me and what I want and need. And I'm not doing this again.
That's great. And so I heard a lot of self-reflection, and not just on the self, but on the goals that you wanted. And you saw what were aligned and what weren't aligned with those goals, as well as those boundaries, because you're like, okay, this is not in alignment with my goal. And so I have to create a boundary. And it sounds like you very successfully did that. Thank you for sharing that experience. It's very powerful for people to know that they can have that self-reflection and they can make those decisions themselves. What piece of advice would you give somebody that's dealing with a toxic relationship, an abusive relationship of any sort?
Yeah, so I think the number one piece of advice I have is to recognize your own expertise. So one of the things we often do when we're in abusive situations, we second guess ourselves. Oftentimes the abuse is designed to make us second guess ourselves with things like gaslighting and these kind of tactics. But at the end of the day, you are the only one who knows what your relationship with this person is like. You have lived experience, the day-to-day operations of navigating this person. There isn't a psychologist, a philosopher, I don't know, an economist. There is nobody in the world who knows that dynamic like you do. So it's really good to listen to experts. It's really good to take that information in. But it's also really important to remember that you're the expert in your own life and those relationship dynamics. And sometimes when you're an expert in something, people will give you advice or ideas that don't apply. And that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're an expert and you have the ability to see things differently. And you need to recognize when it's okay to set that advice down because it's not serving you. And when it's okay to notice like, oh, well, that person just isn't quite understanding what I'm saying.
That's great advice. I like that. To be an expert of yourself and knowing what you can accept and will accept. Setting those healthy boundaries in essence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many survivors spend a lot of time worrying about whether they're really understanding the situation. And I try to encourage people like, look, you're an expert. If your gut is screaming something to you, it is probably right. Most of the time, for the big things, you're going to be right about them. So if you're doubting yourself, if you're really nervous about it, I'd really, encourage you to step back and ask yourself, is this a pattern? Do I feel this way a lot? Is it possible that it's true and I'm actually right? And, let yourself explore that space.
Awesome. Explore that space. I like that.
Yeah. So one thing I always like to mention, because I do deal with people who are actively in very challenging situations, is it's just a resource called the Crisis Text Line. And they are a resource. It's online. And if you're in the United States, you can also text message them. And they have a lot of trained crisis counselors that can help you. And they have a ton of resources available. And the crisis counselor will help you identify what resource might really be helpful for you, given the situation that you're in. It's called the Crisis Text Line.
That's excellent. And do you access it through the internet? Do you access it through your phone? You said texting, but there's also calling or just texting?
So it's all through writing, but you can access it, I believe, on their Facebook. You can message them and you'll be connected to a crisis counselor. And there is a toll-free number that you can also text. But I usually tell people, because I'm on Instagram, if you just look up at Crisis Text Line, you'll get to all of that information from them.
That's awesome. That's an excellent resource. Thank you. Now, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, so there's two main ways. If you're on Instagram, I'm very active over there. My account is at Empowerment Through Thoughts. It's the name of my business, Empowerment Through Thought. If you're not on Instagram, you can also shoot me an email. I'm just Dr. Louise at empowermentthroughthought.com, right? So Dr. Louise at empowermentthroughthought.com. You can shoot me an email and I'd be happy to connect you. I have some free resources, including guides on how to go no contact, how to think through your boundaries and what you really want and need. And, I'm happy to connect with anyone who think I might be able to serve them as they navigate the fallout of long-term abuse.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for being on my podcast today and sharing your story and your resources to our audience here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, audience, for listening to Louise. And remember, there is a way through your difficulty. Please seek out resources and people who can and will help you. Now, if you're looking for alternative tools for handling difficult times or moving ahead in life, contact us at www.resiliency.coach. Hope you all have a blessed day and a wonderful life. Goodbye.